Welcome to SportsBeat KC, the Kansas City Star's daily sports podcast from Arizona, site of Super Bowl 57. It's Tuesday, February 7th, and I'm Blair Kirchhoff. Today, we'll hear from Chiefs Chairman and CEO Clark Hunt. He spent about a half an hour with a handful of reporters responding to questions about a variety of topics, from the hiring of Andy Reid and Brett Veach, what he learned from his experiences about a dozen years ago that led to a changing in the organization's philosophies, and how it led to the current success. I wanted to know about how he feels generating revenue from a new stadium and how that might factor into future plans for Arrowhead. There's plenty more. It's an opportunity to hear from Clark Hunt in a way that only happens at the Super Bowl. Okay, let's get started.
Hey, one thing I want to ask you about is so when you hired Andy, I mean, it had been a few years since he had let go of the GM role in Philly, but if I recall correctly, not a few years since he sort of still retained personnel control, and you were putting together your own new structure. I just wonder how much that was sorted out, and how much you wanted to make sure he had, to whatever degree you could, sort of separation of church and state there, and why that would be an important model for you guys.
Yeah, I'd made the decision going into the interview process that I was going to change the structure and have both the GM and coach report to me. And that was one of the questions I had for Andy, because I knew that he'd had both roles for much of his time in Philadelphia. and he hit that right off the bat in the interview, just saying, look, I enjoy doing them both, but I enjoy being a coach more. And I think in today's NFL, it's best to have someone else performing the GM duties. There's just a lot that goes into the coaching side, and I'll be a better coach if I have somebody else who's doing that.
And obviously, Andy enjoyed trust with John, but have you seen over the years that the level now is? I'm sure he still has quite some say on personnel decisions, but I also imagine he doesn't do a lot of the dirty work, for lack of a better term. I mean, have you seen him let go of that more and more? Is that part of his success, do you think?
Well, my sense is the full 10 years that he's been with us, he's really let the GM and the personnel department handle that. Clearly they bring him in on those discussions to make sure that he's on board, make sure it's a scheme fit. And the communication that he had with both John while John was here, and then with Brett the last 5 or so years, I think has been part of the secret to the success. The two of them are very much on the same page, although I'm sure they have disagreements too.
Clark, what did this season tell you about the organization? A season that I think some people were characterizing as a transition season, not a rebuild, but a transition, and to be in the position you're in today.
Well, certainly going into the season, there were a lot of questions about the team and whether we would be able to repeat or even get back to the playoffs. I think some journalists had us finishing last in our division, which I understand that sentiment, but it was because of the significant change in personnel and the trade of Tyreek. And probably what I've learned about the organization is that Brett and his team are really, really good. I certainly thought that before. Brett did a great job of putting together the Super Bowl 54 team, but this was a tough transition to make and to immediately enjoy success. And he was able to do that, so that's a credit to him.
Clark, can you go back to the time that you hired Brett for the general manager's job? What did you see in him that led you to believe that he was going to handle things the way he has?
Yeah, well, I know that this won't surprise you guys, but he came into the meeting very well prepared. Now, he had the advantage of obviously knowing our personnel better than anybody, but he had a huge binder that he brought to the meeting, which we didn't spend much time in, thankfully. But but he
it was
had
empty, but
He had it in case I wanted to see it, but he had a vision for how he would build the team, and I would probably say it included using free agency more than I was accustomed to, but he felt that that was a important tool. And from day one, he showed us he was very open to trades and free agency and so forth. And we wouldn't have made it to Super Bowl 54 without some of those moves that he made back then. And then by the same token, the draft classes that he's put together the last several years, I think, are key to the success we had this year in being in the Super Bowl.
Now, I know you just drafted Pat when you hired him, so he was already on board, but you didn't know exactly what you had at this time. Was there much discussion about how the quarterback spot would be handled, maybe short and long term? Well, short term, I guess you had your answer.
But from a long-term standpoint, no, because he was obviously very confident in Patrick. I remember we did talk about the importance of periodically drafting young quarterbacks, that you always want to have a young quarterback in the mix, and I knew that Andy liked to have a veteran quarterback too, so that was part of the equation as well, that you have one young one veteran and then your starter.
You haven't drafted one since you drafted Pat?
Pat must be too good.
I remember a press conference maybe 15 years ago, you were talking about your goals for the organization, and it was to be a consistent winner. I think you compared looking at the Steelers, where something you hope the Chiefs could be. And now you look back at the last 10 years, 10 straight winning seasons, 7 straight division titles, and 3 Lamar Hunt trophies in 4 years. What does it mean to you that the Chiefs have reached this point of being this consistent winner?
Yeah, I remember saying that and thinking, how difficult it is to achieve, because part of having stability from a personnel standpoint, I'm talking about coach and GM, is having consistent success, right? So you can't have one without the other, but you've got to get the right people in those positions. And then if you get that, hopefully they enjoy the environment, enjoy working for our family, and they'll stay for a long time. And we've had that now with Andy, and I would say Brett and John over the last 10 years. So couldn't be happier about it. I know it's very hard to sustain, but going back to your question earlier, a lot of the moves that were made this offseason, I think, give us a chance to not only hopefully win a Super Bowl on Sunday, but to be successful over the next several years.
And related to that, obviously you can make the compelling case that this has been the most successful 5-year sequence for the team on the field. Off the field, has that translated? I mean, has this been the most successful 5-year period for the franchise from fiscal standpoint and growing the business, especially in today's competitive environment?
So I would say in modern history, yes. I don't have enough context, from the 60s, and we were going from being a new franchise in Kansas City that was part of a new league, and the NFL wasn't what it is today. So I can imagine there was tremendous growth from the early 60s to the early 70s, and so I can't give you that reference point, but certainly the last 5 years in terms of growing our brand. So if you just look at metrics like total number of fans, social media engagement, we've gone from very much a middle of the pack team to a team that's at or near the top. And that also has translated internationally. Internationally, we're now one of the top brands, and take a market like Germany that we've focused on some there. We're in the top 5 there. We've moved into the top 10 in Mexico. So there definitely has been translation there. The other time that it reminds me a little bit of was when we went from the late 80s into the early 90s. And Marty and Carl Peterson did a tremendous job of turning that team around, and it was a consistent winner for a decade. And the fan base, I think, had grown a little bit apathetic, and obviously Arrowhead became the place to be on Sunday, and that point too.
You mentioned the international brand, Clark, and when I think of American sports teams that have hit it big worldwide, the Yankees, the Bulls, the Lakers, and stuff like that, what does it mean to you that the Chiefs, like, they are in the top 5? They are, like, widely regarded around the world.
Yeah. Well, I obviously thrilled about it, and I tell you what I've reflected on, which you referenced there, was watching the Chicago Bulls become a global brand. And I think you guys know that my dad and mom were a founding investor in the Bulls, and we got to enjoy the Michael Jordan era, which, by the way, that's really the way to be a professional sports owner. You have none of the responsibility, but get to go and enjoy enjoy the championships. That was just a very special time, and I remember traveling internationally and always being so surprised to see people wearing around Chicago Bulls merchandise, mostly number 23, of course. But that really taught me the lesson that it was possible, and that was a long time ago now, and today with social media and the focus of the NFL internationally, I think there's a lot of growth opportunity in front of us on a global basis.
You experienced the Michael Jordan stuff. You mentioned that. Any comparison with what the Mahomes effect is right now?
When you sit around and start thinking about, okay, who has been like Patrick Mahomes historically as a pro athlete, it's a very short list, and because of our family's experience with the Bulls, Michael Jordan's always the first one that comes to mind for me.
Clark, when you're just thinking back about some points of the 60s, the context of the 60s and the Chiefs being really pioneering and race breakthroughs in the AFL and not early in the NFL. I wonder if that lends any special context to you to have this be the first 2 Super Bowl with 2 black quarterbacks starting it. Some way you feel that historic sense with the Chiefs.
First of all, certainly the work that my dad, Jack Stedman, and Hank Stram, did in helping integrate the NFL back in the 60s is to be applauded at all times. And they did that, I think, without intention. They did it because they were trying to put together the best football team that they could. And I've seen the articles and the reports about this being the first Super Bowl with 2 African American quarterbacks, and on the one hand, it's a little surprising that that's the fact, and on the other hand, it's a great thing, and I think it's really a credit to the 2 players, right? Because not only are they special athletes, but they're 2 guys that have worked really, really hard, and they're really, really good teammates and leaders. And so I think that's why they're there.
And this is a little unrelated, but it was years of feeling like you want to break through and get to this level. And I don't think we ever really just asked you how it personally feels to you to feel like you've got this run going and no reason to think it won't continue. I mean, how much different does it feel to go to work than it did when you were just hoping to break through with a playoff win?
Yeah. It really started with winning that first AFC championship back at the end of the 19th season, and we accomplished so many things that year that either had never been done or hadn't been done in 50 years, and there was a sense of relief to that, and I would say also tremendous joy. When I think about that football season from a family standpoint, that's the word that always comes to mind. And I think our fans felt that as well. And then being able to have consistent success over the last 3 years since that. The only thing I could tell you is just what a great blessing it is. I know how rare this is. It does not happen to very many franchises. It's very difficult in the context of today's NFL with the salary cap and the other mechanisms that are designed to create parity. And I come back to giving Andy and Brett tremendous credit for being able to make it happen.
Before that Super Bowl year, first one, I think you said your mom told you it'd be nice if you'd do it in her lifetime.
Right.
Does she now expect it? That's all right. How do you reconcile that?
Yeah. Well, she was really upset at us the last couple of years. So we're back in our good graces.
Clark, we spoke a little while, or you spoke a little while ago about revenue, and I'm wondering if you could speak to the importance of generating revenue from the stadium and possibly entertainment district, and how that's changed over the years, and we're seeing that in other markets.
Right. So as you look around professional sports in the United States, and I think elsewhere also, whether it's an arena or a stadium, baseball, football, soccer, the growth in those facilities seems to accelerate at all times. There are stadiums that were built 20 to 25 years ago, which we all thought, wow, that is really the latest and greatest. Those stadiums are now being torn down so that something else can be built that has more of the bells and whistles that you need from a revenue standpoint today. So it's a very important part of the equation, I think, to being successful. Because there is a financial race going on behind the scenes that's not about making money, but it's about having the financial resources so that you can have a championship team. And so that's very, very important, and the bar does seem to get raised every couple of years. Most recently in the NFL with SoFi. I mean, what a beautiful facility that is. So it is a very important part to the equation. We're fortunate to have had a stadium like GEHA Field at Arrowhead that has allowed us to compete, financially. We obviously have some big decisions in front of us about its future, and we're working on that, and hope to have that sorted out in the next couple of years.
You mentioned about the turnover of stadiums. If I'm not mistaken, Arrowhead, I think, is the third oldest in the NFL behind Lambeau and Soldier. Those obviously have rich histories. How compelling is it to keep Arrowhead in that? When you're going into discussions about stadiums, I mean, how important a factor is that Arrowhead has a history that most places don't?
I think it's a very important part of the Chiefs' history and the Chiefs' legacy. It's a place that fans, whether they're from Kansas City or not, love to come to see a pro football game. When I walk the parking lots, I'm always fascinated to meet people who it's their first time to Arrowhead, and they are so excited about it. And I really think there are only a couple fields like that, Lambeau being the other one. Soldier, clearly has had that in the past. It sounds like the Bears may be making a move there. But fans, if you're a football fan, you need to go to Lambeau Field, and you must go to Arrowhead, right? Those are sort of the two places, and that is something that's special, and something that we'll take into consideration as we think about our future.
Okay, I feel compelled to ask this. In 2020 in Miami, you had mentioned some surprise that Eric Bieniemy had not been hired. And here we are 3 hiring cycles after 2020, and he still hasn't had a head coaching position. Your surprise level at this point compared to 2020, where would you say it is now?
Yeah. I wouldn't say that it's grown, because I knew what a great coach Eric was at that point, and thought he would get an opportunity, and I've continued to think that. At this point, he's maybe been through too many hiring cycles, and it's almost become a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy that he's not getting the opportunity. I know he's still interested, and he would do a fantastic job. And I'm glad that he's going to have the stage that he'll have on Sunday to once again show what a tremendous offensive coordinator he is.
Clark, you mentioned that Brett perhaps looked to do more free agency than you've been accustomed to, and obviously you restructured when you brought in Andy and John. I wonder if there are other ways you can think of that you've maybe consciously changed as an owner in your time, or if those are maybe the two most substantial things. I'm sure it's hard to get your arms around, but.
I would say I'm much more comfortable in the role, and worry less about things that I know I can't control, right? And the best solution to not worrying about things you can't control is having great people like Andy, Brett, and I would put Mark Donovan in that category too, who are all also talented, and I know they're going to do a great job.
How hard is it to get to that place where you say, I'm more comfortable? I mean, obviously, as you said, the people enable you to do that, but still, you're carrying that with you into the role. Was that, and is it any harder because of the family history of living up to your father?
When I succeeded my father, I knew I was stepping into some very big shoes to fill, and I could never be like him, right? There's only one Lamar Hunt, and he was so special, such a visionary, such a great leader, somebody that people followed because they just absolutely loved him. So I knew that I couldn't be like him, and I had to just do it my way. I would say having experience is beneficial, even though I grew up around pro sports and watched my dad in the role for all those years. Until you're in the position and have to make the decisions, you really are never going to have the experience. Experience is sort of the best teacher.
With any business, especially the one that's been on top like the NFL has been, there's always threats. What do you see right now to the NFL as far as the threats and the challenges going forward to keeping the business growing, with competition out there?
Right. I would say health and safety of the players is an issue that we just have to stay on top of, and that's something that in the last 20 years the shift in the league's focus on that has been one of the biggest changes internally, and I know it'll continue to be a focus of the league. And then I think there's so many other entertainment opportunities, particularly for the younger generations. There are a lot of things grabbing their attention. They don't watch TV like at least I did growing up, so that you're not going to convert them as a fan by having them watch TV. And we've got this transition going on to streaming, and I'm trying to think about how that plays out, because the NFL's model long term has been broad distribution over free TV, which has been very effective in building a huge fan base in North America and also to some degree internationally. So I'm curious to see how that plays out.
Mark, looking back on the 6 or 8 years before you hired Andy, do you feel like you needed to go through that to get to where you are now, if that makes any sense? Asking it a better way, were there things you learned during that period maybe that helped get you where you are now?
Right. I think about that period frequently, and I knew that we were going to have a tough time, because when I took over, we had a very old roster, and we had not drafted well for several years, so the cupboard was literally empty. And I'd like to second guess myself that I should have done this or I should have done that. I'm not sure that it was correctable, in those first few years. Although there definitely some decisions I wish I'd made differently. Looking at it from today and having the perspective of the 15 years, I don't want to say I'm glad that it played out like it did, but it was probably necessary for it to play out like it did, to end up with Andy as the coach, making the change in the structure which without the struggles of those 5 or 6 years, I would never have made the change in the structure. I mean, that was my biggest takeaway from that is next time we hire a head coach, I want to be the guy doing the interviews and making the decision, as opposed to just somebody who's consulting and approving that. So that was the biggest takeaway from that, and looking at it 10 years later, I'm thankful for it.
Why do you feel like that's been so good, at least in the case of the Chiefs?
Well, I'd say a couple things about it. I think organizations, NFL teams that have the structure we do, you have a better chance of hiring a head coach who's a good fit with ownership, right? Because in the other structure where that's been delegated to the general manager, there's a disconnect. And you also end up in a scenario where the head coach wants to circumvent the general manager on some issues and go directly to the owner, and that undermines the relationship, as you can imagine, between the GM and the head coach. So it's worked very well for us. I'm much more informed about what's going on with the football team than I was under the other structure, because the other structure I was relying on the general manager to provide me that information and occasionally talking to the head coach about it. But now I speak to both on a weekly basis, and I sort of understand their two perspectives, and if they're not on the same page, which Brett and Andy mostly are, but if they're not, I'm aware of it.
Hey guys, we probably have about 4 more minutes, just so you know.
Clark, speaking of Andy and getting more involved in the process, so that the interview with Andy at the Philadelphia airport was, I think, well documented. It was about 9 hours, supposed to be a couple hours. Meanwhile, with the Cardinals plane waiting outside, if I understand correctly. So can you sort of explain how that was shooed away and what you were able to accomplish that day? I know the hiring wasn't made that day, right? But it was virtually locked in, I guess.
Right. I think both Andy and I left that meeting, thinking that this was probably going to work out. But just thinking back to that meeting, we had 3 or 4 hours, laid out for it, and he was supposed to get on this plane, which I wasn't aware the plane was there initially. But as the meeting went on, this plane was there and it had its door open, and I was like, I wonder what that is. And finally, Andy said, "Yeah, I'm supposed to get on that plane," or was supposed to get on that plane. It was interesting because I didn't know that he was going to get on that plane, and I wasn't trying to prevent him from doing it. It was really just that the interview was going so well, and we had so much to talk about, right? That's what turned it into a 9-hour interview. And also at some point in the interview, it flipped around, and he was interviewing me, right? Trying to just figure out and understand not only who I am, but what the culture of the organization was, what our facilities were like, what it was like living in Kansas City, something that he hadn't done. So, and it ended up taking 9 hours. So it worked out well.
Did you think about shooting out the tires of that?
Had I known.
It's funny thinking about, though, that I guess maybe if he'd gotten the interview with them, maybe he'd have a home Super Bowl now. I don't know.
We're not going to let that happen.
Clark, you mentioned the trust you have in Brett. When you see so many young players, and especially rookies, contributing this year in the biggest games of the season, how satisfying is that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's really, maybe the story of the 2022 Chiefs is the emergence of this rookie class. There was a lot of excitement about them coming in, but hey, they were rookies, right? And rookies usually don't start, and when they do, they have letdowns. And through the season, certainly there's been some growing pains and as we've gone along, but they've played so much that they really are playing well. And I think last week in the AFC Championship game was a great example of that. Just off the top of my head, I can think of 7 key plays made by 7 different rookies, and I'm probably leaving somebody out, that really allowed us to win that game. And without those plays, maybe we don't win the game. So as opposed to winning despite having a bunch of rookies on the team, we're winning now because we have those rookies on the team. And again, the credit goes to Brett and the staff for doing a magnificent job.
That'll do it for today from the Super Bowl. Thanks to our SportsBeat KC production staff of George Howard, Bonnie Davis, Randy Mason, Jeff Rosen, and Scott Chasen. We are your source for all things Chiefs in Arizona. Follow the coverage in the print editions of the Kansas City Star, online at kansascity.com, and my favorite source, the Morning Sports Edition. Check it out at liveedition.kansascity.com. Thanks for listening. Stay with us all week from the Super Bowl, where we talk Chiefs and all things sports in Kansas City every day.